I have to start with a confession there, and that is that often these things happen quite accidentally. And one knows only afterwards that one did exactly what the history of one's field demanded should be done next, while actually one just indulged oneself in a new interest.
As social scientists go about their business of doing research, they are guided by theoretical pictures. The picture guiding this series, Seasons of Life, is of 3 developmental clocks: a biological clock, which is the body's way of keeping time, a social clock, which is society's way, and a psychological clock, which is the individual's way. This picture wasn't the first, and for that matter won't be the last. An earlier and not incompatible view saw life as a staircase, as a series of crises that had to be met one after the other. What was remarkable about this picture at the time it was drawn was not the stairs themselves, but how far they went. The theory was one of the first to say that we grow and change throughout all of adult life. The man responsible for the theory was an artist who became a psychoanalyst. In the course of his life, he got a different career, a different country, and a different name. What's important for us is that he sketched a different way of seeing the seasons of life. This is the story of the man and his portrait, Professor Erik Hamburger Erikson. Erik Erikson was born in 1902. A child of Danish parents, he never knew his father, who separated from his mother before he was born. He was raised in Germany, where his mother married a pediatrician who had treated the boy for an illness. Young Erik was given his stepfather's name, Hamburger. He was raised in a comfortable Jewish home, attended local schools, and met artists whom his parents entertained. He wasn't a particularly good student, and when he graduated from school at the age of 18, he became a wandering artist, touring Europe mostly on foot. He drifted. At the age of 25, preparing to teach art, young Erik Hamburger met Sigmund Freud and his daughter Anna. That meeting was quite accidental, as Erikson remembered in 1964.
In those days, I tried to make a living from being a teacher. And I was really, I had an old friend who was a tutor in a family that was very close to the Freuds. And he asked me to be the tutor of these children for one summer in the Austrian Alps, and that is how I met the Freuds.
Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory was steadily gaining recognition in 1927, when Erik Hamburger began psychoanalytic training with Freud's daughter, Anna.
The leading analysts picked from their acquaintances people who they thought had some, I don't know what to call it, psychoanalytic sense, who might be gifted, and especially Anna Freud at that time looked for people who might develop the field of child analysis, which is the first I specialized in.
At first, Erikson doubted his psychoanalytic sense, but the wandering artist was drawn to what he called the artful part of psychoanalysis.
I don't know whether I'm boasting or I'm apologizing when I say I came to psychoanalysis really from art. In those days, Sigmund Freud was quite eager to have some people, not the majority of psychoanalytic candidates, come from non-medical fields. I think he always felt that psychoanalysis was something in between science and art. And while he made many scientific and even scientist formulations, I think the artful part of his work always stands out in comparison with others. And you may remember that his early case histories were in fact accused of reading like novels. So I cannot deny that this is what first attracted me to it. And I also was very much impressed when I first met Freud with his great understanding of art.
Erich Hamburger qualified as a practicing psychoanalyst with the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society, but in 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. When Freud's writings were publicly burned in Berlin, Hamburger left Europe. He came to America with his Canadian wife Joan and their 2 young sons. Speaking little English, he settled in Boston and began practice as one of America's first psychoanalysts for children. He changed his name to Erikson, as he explained during a seminar at Harvard, where he and his wife Joan spoke in 1985.
We came to this country. We brought 2 little boys from Vienna.
With German passports.
With German passports. And at that time, my name, for example, was in the telephone book under Hamburger Erik. And one telephone call after another was, Dr. Hamburger? And Joan decided we're not going to let 2 boys grow up. It's her name. It's simply, now, I wish you would keep this a little to yourself.
As Joan tells it, it was the 2 young Hamburger boys who decided the family name.
The other thing that determined it was that when we talked to the children, we had a kind of family meeting about what we should be called in this country. Finally, the word came up, well, we are sons. Let's be sons of Erik. And we thought that was really nice.
Without any kind of degree, Erikson was appointed to the Harvard Medical School. A few years later, he accepted a position at Yale University. In 1938, a colleague at Yale happened to tell Erikson of an opportunity to observe the children of Sioux Indians living on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota.
And he simply said, why don't you come out to the Sioux Indians with me? Because there the government is trying to send the Indian children to schools which are primarily staffed by non-Indians, in fact by Easterners. And the previous childhood of these children is not at all taken into account. And I think you could be helpful there.
The idea appealed at once to the 36-year-old Erikson.
These were the Sioux Indians that, of course, in Europe you read about. So they are the American Indian. And there was a man in Germany who wrote books which we as boys read avidly. So the moment I knew these were the Sioux, as we called them, I couldn't stay away. That's how it started.
About 70 miles east of Custer, South Dakota, just south of Wounded Knee, Erikson found Pine Ridge. Other researchers had made the trip before him, but none had seen the Sioux the way Erikson would.
For example, there was a handbook on the Sioux Indians, and in that, half a page was devoted to childhood. And it was the easiest thing in the world to go out there and ask these grandmothers, now, before the white man came, how were your children brought up? They loved to talk about it. They always wondered why nobody asked them.
Basically, those grandmothers told Erikson that Sioux children were taught the things that would make them good Sioux adults.
The interesting thing was that all the things we had taken seriously on the basis of pathological observation, we found these people took seriously on the basis of how they felt a Sioux Indian child would become a good Sioux Indian. Some of the phenomena that Freud had observed in patients and in dreams and in myths and so on were relevant there, but most of all that early childhood was very intrinsically related to the technology and the world image of a culture.
In 1939, the Eriksons moved to the University of California in Berkeley, where one of the first longitudinal studies of human development was underway. The experience of being part of that study, as well as the experiences with the Freuds in Vienna and the Sioux in South Dakota, led in 1950 to Erikson's landmark book, Childhood and Society. He was 48 when it was published. The book contains one of psychology's most influential theories of development, from the beginning of life to the end. Through his clinical work in Vienna, Freud came to the conclusion that human development occurred in a series of psychosexual stages. He described 5 distinct periods of life, the last one beginning in adolescence. Erikson's work with the Sioux taught him the importance of culture. He expanded the interpretation of Freud's 5 stages and added 3 of his own to cover life after adolescence. In Erikson's view, there were 8 important crises in life, and hence 8 stages of development. The first he called trust versus mistrust. Freud's first stage was the oral stage. At the beginning of life, he believed, the mouth is the source of gratification. Erikson agreed, but went further.
I felt that the first basic psychosocial attitude to be learned is that you can trust your mother, that she will come back and feed you, that you can trust she will feed you the right thing in the right quantity at the right time, that when you're uncomfortable she will come and make you comfortable and so on. This is what I mean by basic trust. You see, in animals this is all given instinctively. In man it has to be learned.
How? Mothers create a sense of trust in their children by the mutual regulation of the needs and desires of both mother and child. The baby sounds of relaxation are often a sign of developing trust.
But mistrust is just as important. In fact, if you don't mind my griping for a moment, it happens so easily that when this is quoted, people take away mistrust. The ratio of trust and mistrust is our basic social attitude. We do this constantly. If we walk, if we enter somewhere, we have to differentiate now. Can we trust or mistrust? And mistrust meaning the recognition of danger, the anticipation of discomfort, and so on.
According to Erikson, healthy infants both trust and mistrust, but it's trust that predominates and lays the foundations for life. Freud's second stage was the anal stage. During the 2nd and 3rd years of life, he said, the child is toilet trained and derives pleasure from holding in and letting go. Erikson saw this period as the battle of autonomy versus shame, stage 2 of his theory.
This is one of the intrinsic, if you can call it, the conflict of human development, that once a child has learned to trust his mother and to trust the world, then he becomes self-willed. And then, of course, he takes chances with his trust, because then he tries out to see what he can will. He pits his will against the will of others.
No. I can do it by myself.
Basic trust must not be jeopardized by the sudden, violent wish to have a choice. Though shame is necessary, according to Erikson, it should be balanced by a healthy sense of autonomy. It will make a difference later on.
In other words, in each of these stages, something develops without which the later mature human capacity cannot develop.
The outcome of the crisis at stage 2 hinges on a child's ability to acquire autonomy without excessive shame. What the child needs from the environment to meet the crisis is firmness and reassurance. Freud's 3rd stage, from ages 3 to 6, was the Phallic Stage. During this time, he said, the child develops and takes pleasure in his or her own sexual organs. Erikson called this stage initiative versus guilt.
He begins to envisage goals. He begins to, for example, identify with people whose work or whose personality he can appreciate. And he begins to think of being big.
At this stage, the child is interested in making. There is no simpler, stronger word for it.
When he plays, for example, it's not just a matter of practicing his will or practicing his ability to manipulate. He begins to have projects, as it were.
One 6-year-old makes booby traps for his dog.
It's a long box that he can have lots of room in, but he can hardly fit in it. His back can touch it. I make I put the chairs on the bottom of the steps. He just goes underneath them and comes right up. So I didn't know how he did that. Then I saw him, and then I moved the coffee table over in front of the chair, and I put heavy things on it so it will stay.
Guilt is the great check on initiative. The task of this stage is the development of initiative without overwhelming guilt. Freud believed that personality was well established by the end of stage 3, that is, by about the age of 6. As the child set off for school, there came an interlude that Freud called the latency stage. But Erikson saw the period from 6 to 12 as more than a timeout. Much of personality had yet to be formed. This was a critical time of conflict between industry and inferiority, stage 4 of his theory. Industry is a sense of being useful, a sense of making things well, of being competent in the skills of one's culture.
The term is often misunderstood because industry now means big industry, technology. But in the old sense, it merely means being busy with something, trying to complete something.
The playing child now begins to work. At this age, children want to be shown how to do things, and every culture responds.
I mean, Indians out in the forests would give a little boy at this age a little play arrow, bow and arrow. We are a literate civilization, so we show them how to read and write.
I'm usually on the newspaper staff. It's called the Cobra Chronicle. That's their school newspaper. It's kind of neat because you'll get the facts that you want to put into the story, and then you'll just kind of make a rough draft, and then I'll take it in and put it on the computer and fix it up a little. And just before you print it out, you check over everything, just to make sure you don't want to change, like a word or something. And then you just print it out and submit it to your teacher.
The danger of this stage is inferiority, a despair of one's skills, the feeling that you will never be any good. Erikson wrote that children need to be mildly but firmly coerced into the adventure of accomplishing things they would never have thought of by themselves. At adolescence, according to Freud, the young person enters the genital stage, seeking sexual stimulation and satisfaction. This stage lasts throughout life, and with it comes the capacity to love and to work. Erikson saw more, the need of young people to know who they are and where they belong, the need to form an identity.
I'm a nice guy, trustworthy, honest. I think if any one of my friends that I know, if they had a problem of some kind, I would help them if I could, and I wouldn't, go gabbing it to everybody else. I think I can keep a secret and just think I care.
I suggest that now his cognitive capacities are such and his social interests are such that he now wants to know where does he fit in his culture.
So I always thought a counselor type role would be neat. I could enjoy doing something like that. Just like I said, being that type of person that you could depend on to help you if you needed it.
Identity, according to Erikson, means that you really know who you are and what you want to be. Its opposite is role confusion, that is, doubt and uncertainty about sexual, ethnic, occupational, or personal identity. Interestingly, of Erikson's 8 stages, this one, identity versus role confusion, is the one that captured the attention of Americans.
Since I first thought about this, there has been something of an identity explosion. Identity is discussed everywhere. Personal identity, racial identity, national identity.
Identity crisis became a household term, and Erikson could ask in 1973, is there any other country which continues to ask itself, who are we anyway?
Which I think has to do with the fact that this is a country of changes. First of all, of immigrants who have moved to this country, have given up their old national identities, then a country of tremendous industrial development, a country of tremendous migration all the time, shifting, moving, so that not only for the first generation of Americans, but also for the subsequent ones, apparently the problem of identity is a very central and very disturbing one.
In Erikson's view, successfully establishing a sense of identity in adolescence depends in large measure upon the events of previous stages. A positive identity cannot begin to exist without the trust of the first stage, the autonomy of the second, and the initiative of the third. It derives immediately from the sense of industry of the fourth stage. Nor does a favorable resolution of the adolescent identity crisis rule out role confusion. It means only that we've got more clarity than doubt about who we are and what we hope to be. Freud's picture of human development has been found insightful in some respects, but lacking in others. One of the deficiencies is a belief that critical aspects of development are over, if not by the age of 6, then certainly by the end of adolescence. Erikson had a different vision. Development is lifelong, and so he added 3 stages to Freud's 5. The first, stage 6 in his theory, concerns the need for intimacy. The young adult is eager to share a newfound sense of identity with someone else.
Our relationship seemed so right and so close, and we really did feel love for each other. And we'd been through life, and a lot of other people, I've always had a belief that they have to go out and play the field and find out what they want. Me and Shelley, we came together and it seemed just so right. 2 weeks after we had started going out, I proposed.
Intimacy is really the ability to fuse your identity with somebody else's, without fear that you're going to lose something yourself. That's why it is the stage which makes marriage possible, and why marriage doesn't work if that has not developed.
The fear of this stage is the loss of identity in a situation that calls for self-abandon. If one is confused about identity, isolation can replace true intimacy. And isolation, in Erikson's view, leaves you poorly prepared for the crisis of middle age. Generativity versus self-absorption, stage 7 of his theory. Generativity is an unusual word. It means a concern for establishing and guiding the next generation, for leaving your mark on the future. It can be expressed through children or some other creative way. But it's not just creativity.
I avoid the word creativity. Generativity is not a nice word, but it means generate, and in that sense is the widest possible term for producing something.
I've done it all. I was in business for a while, big business. And yeah, it was fun to have the money. But it wasn't the money that was giving me the satisfaction. It's making a difference with kids. And what really makes it great is to know that they know somebody has touched their lives finally in a positive way, in a good way, in a caring and a feeling way, not in a hurtful way. It makes you go on.
The opposite of generativity is self-absorption, a lack of concern for the generations to come. Life's final crisis, stage 8, is integrity versus despair. Integrity is the affirmation of order and meaning in one's life. Despair is its opposite, the sense that it's too late to find anything of value in what's happened. Now you accept or reject what has been.
There's a thread that goes through your whole life. And when you see some of that in your own children, you feel that your life was not in vain. You feel that you lived a good life. You feel that you did what you possibly could under the circumstances. And there's a good feeling of knowing that your children have learned from what you have gone through, what your life has meant.
As one life nears its end, others are beginning. In Erikson's vision of the life cycle, healthy children will not fear life if their elders have integrity enough not to fear death. Erikson's theory of human development has not escaped criticism. Far from it. Some say it's biased toward male development, others that it's never been thoroughly tested with the traditional methods of social science. The principal objection, though, is its basic outline of life as a staircase with fixed stages, each of which is reached at a specified age. But life is not like that, critics say. You don't achieve trust once and for all in the first year of life. You don't discover in adolescence once and for all who you are and what you want to be. The theory predates today's overwhelming evidence of variety and flexibility in the way people age. But Erikson does not discount that evidence, and in his mind, his theory is not fixed at all. It is a portrait drawn by an artist, a way of picturing our development throughout life. Erik Erikson began this canvas more than half a century ago during a conversation with Anna Freud, a conversation that changed the course of young Erik Hamburger's life.
I had told Anna Freud again, look, I'm an artist. This whole business is not for me. I want to get out of here. The next day she came back and she said, I told my father what you said. And he said, tell him he can help us to make them see.